Unforgivable. Gareth Southgate hits back at the torrent of racist abuse aimed at his team. After last night's defeat, black players Rashford, Saka and Sancho have all had to deal with disgusting attacks online, despite the wave of pride felt at Wembley last night.
For some of them to be abused is unforgivable, really. It's just not what we stand for.
Also tonight, restrictions will be eased in a week in England, but cases are rising, so we're told to be cautious. We've got the details.
Fires rolling downhill here.
A record heat wave drives huge wildfires across the west of America, and after a year of heartache, the thank you to the England team for sparking some much-needed joy.
This is the ITV Evening News with Charlene White.
Good evening. There was a certain level of inevitability after England's defeat on penalties last night that the team's black players would be targeted online with horrific abuse. Within minutes, it started and has continued. Gareth Southgate has called it unforgivable. FA President, the Duke of Cambridge, said he's sickened by it, and police have launched an investigation. The England manager called the team a beacon of light that brought people together. Here's our sports editor, Steve Scott.
Bukayo Saka, and it's saved.
It was a cruel end to a fabulous month. Losing a final is bad enough, but the return of England's penalty curse makes it feel even worse. Why was it left to 19-year-old Bukayo Saka to keep England alive? Where were the more senior players? Gareth Southgate said today it's all down to him.
It's my decision who takes the penalties. It's not a case of players not volunteering or, more experienced players backing out. They didn't have the chance. That was my choice, nobody else's.
What followed made an already heartbreaking night sickening. Saka and the two other players who missed, Marcus Rashford and Jadon Sancho, became the targets of racial abuse again.
For some of them to be abused is unforgivable, really. I know a lot of that has come from abroad. The people that track those things have been able to explain that, but not all of it, and it's just not what we stand for.
The FA today expressed frustration at the lack of direct action taken by the social media giants.
Well, we've been speaking with the companies involved for the last 2 months, and really the progress has been very, very limited. So we believe that legislation is the only way. We want to bring in responsibility onto the companies and make sure that they bring in the change that's required to stop this happening.
The Prime Minister too had a few chosen words for the keyboard racists.
I say shame on you, and I hope you will crawl back under the rock from which you emerged.
It wasn't just the online abuse that took the shine off England's night. There was disorder outside the stadium too. Ticketless fans also burst through security fences and tried to get in to watch the match. It's not known how many succeeded, but 53 arrests were made. All in all, it was not a good look. Should the FA decide a joint bid to host the 2030 World Cup is a good idea. But what of Southgate's squad now? They're young and have just taken England to their first ever Euros final. Surely this is just the beginning.
All of this team can go again, there's no doubt about that, but the young ones are still 2-4 years from peaking, and we've got 18, 19, 20-year-olds who've done an incredible job and had a great insight into tournament football and acquitted themselves so well throughout.
Something to contemplate as they head off for their summer holidays. When the hurt dies down, they'll feel proud they reached a final, but will be eager to take that next step. And in the unlikely event they are in need of any extra motivation, pictures of Italy's homecoming today will probably just about do it. Steve Scott, ITV News.
The team's ability to bring the country together, irrespective of your background, is undeniable, which makes the racist abuse all the more repulsive. And despite progress, it shows how far society still has to go until abuse of all forms is weeded out. As Sejal Karia now reports.
Before we start here, all the players will take the knee.
Despite the booing, controversy and criticism, the England teams insisted on taking the knee before matches, a decision now vindicated.
England's players take the knee.
After Marcus Rashford, Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka's missed penalties in the final led to a torrent of racial abuse online. A reminder, not everyone glories in the diverse portrait of the country this team reflects. Ex-footballer and anti-racism campaigner in sport Chris Ramsey says he's appalled.
3 heroes of the country, you know, they've done absolutely fantastic in the last month, with the whole squad has done absolutely fantastic. And to feel that we're still having to fight against this in this day and age just upsets me, and it upsets everybody in and around it.
Following last night's game, racially abusive messages flooded players' social media accounts. The sheer scale of it, shocking. Twitter said it removed 1,000 posts in the past 24 hours. And Facebook, which owns Instagram, said it did the same. But not all of it was confined online. In Manchester, a mural honouring Rashford was vandalised with graffiti shortly after last night's penalty shootout. It's now been covered up. And estate agent Savills has suspended an employee after launching an investigation into racist tweets directed at England players. But social media giants are being criticised for not doing enough to stamp out racism, despite footballers and their teams boycotting their platforms in April.
Bans are voluntary. There are trolls and users who've been banned 100 times and they come back in. If we ban you from the stadium, you've got a lifetime ban. If we ban you from Twitter or Facebook, you're back 10 minutes later.
Marcus Rashford has been one of those campaigning against online hate that social media giants say they are committed to cracking down on. The government is banking on its delayed online harms bill to make them up their game. But there are concerns it may prove to be too weak. Sejal Karia, ITV News.
Well, our sports editor, Steve Scott, has joined us in the studio. And Steve, racism has overshadowed what was an incredible tournament, but there's still lots to look forward to, isn't there?
There is, but it is still sad, isn't it, that we're sitting here today on what should be a proud day discussing 2 things that football can't seem to shake off, England in particular, and that is this horrible racism that these players get, and then these mindless thugs who attach themselves to football and the England team in particular. The most serious, of course, is the racism, and for all the campaigning, for all the slogans, I don't think we seem to be making any headway. But if we can park those 2 for the moment, I think, yes, there is a lot to look forward to in the future. I think this team should be very confident. I mean, they've reached the final for the first time, the Euros final for the first time in our history. They're clearly a very close-knit bunch. They're the 2nd youngest team in the tournament, and they clearly also like working under Gareth Southgate. Now, coming up next year is the World Cup, and I don't think you'll find too many people who would necessarily bet against this group of players, maybe replicating what they've done this time round, perhaps going even better.
Well, let's hope so. Steve, thanks very much. OK, let's move on to the day's other main story. And the remaining restrictions will be lifted a week today in England. That's what the Prime Minister confirmed this afternoon. But because we're rising COVID cases, there are a few final tweaks. COVID passports will be recommended for big events in places like nightclubs, and masks won't be legally required. But we're being strongly advised to use them indoors in settings like public transport. And there was a change of tone from Boris Johnson today. He said he hoped the easing would be irreversible. Well, the latest figures show 34,471 new UK infections. That's up 28% over the past week. Here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan.
If Freedom Day is coming, it's heavily laced with caution. Although the government won't make you wear a mask, from Monday it will expect you to in crowded indoor spaces. But there was no masking the Prime Minister's trepidation in taking this step.
This pandemic is not over. This disease, coronavirus, continues to carry risks for you and your family. We cannot simply revert instantly from Monday the 19th of July to life as it was before COVID.
Prime Minister, you used to say that these steps on the roadmap would be irreversible. Do you still believe that?
Carl, thanks. Yes, of course, I hope that the roadmap is irreversible. We've always said we hope that it will be irreversible, but in order to have an irreversible roadmap, we've also said it's got to be a cautious approach.
And so this step has already been delayed by 4 weeks to allow more vaccinations and bring it closer to school holidays. But Monday is still not ideal.
There is no such thing as an ideal date. All the possible dates have downsides. And the modelling studies that have been done on this largely show that all dates essentially tend to lead to broadly similar outcomes.
The latest number for daily hospital admissions is 563. Government models say releasing the final restrictions could cause 1,000 to 2,000 daily admissions by mid-August. But at times in January, daily admissions were running at 4,000 a day. So the government judges pressure on the NHS would not be unsustainable, but there are few certainties.
With infection rates still going up at the rate they're going up, this plan is still reckless, I'm afraid. We need a safe way of coming through this, and I feel very strongly at the moment that the government wants to put the country in a car without a seatbelt to get as quickly as possible to the end of the roadmap.
And there are still many people, like Lizzie, who could be at risk from the virus.
Unfortunately, I am one of hundreds of thousands of people in this country who is immunosuppressed. And what that means for me is that the vaccine didn't work. I've had COVID and I've been vaccinated, but blood tests show I haven't made any antibodies or T-cell response. So I'm just as vulnerable to COVID as I ever was.
Dropping the restrictions this summer is a risk, but the government believes that sooner or later a risk will have to be taken. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
So what will be changing for people in England next Monday? Well, as we've just heard, social distancing and wearing masks in public places won't be enforced, but it will be up to individual choice. No limit on the number of people who can meet, both indoors and outdoors. No cap on how many people can go to weddings, funerals, sporting events and festivals. Nightclubs will be able to reopen for the first time since the pandemic began. The government's no longer requesting that people work from home. Employees can return to the office. And the rule that care homes residents can only have 5 named visitors will be scrapped. Well, our political editor, Robert Peston, has joined us in the studio. Watching that press conference, there was a change of tone from the PM. He said he hoped that all of this will be irreversible. So could we see lockdowns returning at some point?
So I think it's unlikely, but not impossible. I mean, what one has to remember is that although the virus is surging at the moment, and indeed the Health Secretary himself has acknowledged that we could be seeing 100,000 infections a day within a few weeks, which is the greatest number of infections we've ever seen. The link, however, between infections and hospitalisations and deaths is not what it was. But hospitalisations are rising now quite sharply. Does that mean that, I fear, since hospitalisations, I think, is the key statistic they look at, the ability of the NHS to cope, do I think a lockdown is going to come back on the basis of that? Probably not, because back in January, when hospitalisations were through the roof, the NHS did just about cope. It was ghastly for all of us, lots and lots of people dying, but it just about coped. So I think we've got to think about this in a new way, which is about, frankly, how we avoid getting sick. Because even if we don't go to hospital and even if we don't die, this is a horrible illness. Right? Some people get long COVID, but even young people are in bed for quite a long time, feeling absolutely miserable. And I think the Prime Minister, and it'd be interesting to know whether British people agree with him, thinks that somehow the risk of getting ill but not very seriously ill is better than lockdown. One final thing very quickly. Of course, there are very clinically vulnerable people. The most important thing we've yet to hear is how they are going to be protected, because it is not safe for them simply to catch the virus in any sense at all.
OK, Robert, thanks very much. OK, still to come in the ITV Evening News. The shocking homophobic attack on Merseyside, where hate crimes are on the rise.
I know that I'm probably dramatising it, but no one goes on a night out and thinks that they're not going to come home.
And the fires raging in the United States as temperatures soar. Those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. A man who was subjected to a vicious homophobic attack in Liverpool has told ITV News he feared he might die. Aidan Benson was celebrating his graduation when he was beaten by 3 men. It's the latest in a number of assaults and hate crimes targeting the LGBTQ+ community in the city. And a warning that this report from our North of England reporter Hannah Miller has graphic images of Aidan's injuries, which he asked us to show.
There's a lot of swelling under my eye, but most of the injuries were just visible, is that one.
Aidan was out celebrating his graduation on Friday when he says a group of men turned on him, shouted homophobic slurs and left him bloodied, bruised and scared for his life.
And I was like, and what if I die and don't get the chance to tell my mum and dad that I love them, you know? And I know that I'm probably like dramatising it, you know, like, but no one goes on a night out and thinks that they're not going to come home.
3 days on, 2 men have been arrested and released on bail while police continue their inquiries. But for Aidan, the mental scars will take longer to heal.
When it all happened, I was like, if this is what being gay means, then I don't want to be gay. But I totally take that back. Like, I'm never going to be ashamed for being gay. I'm so proud of who I am. I'm so proud of the community and the gay community and the things that they're going through and that they've faced up to.
The attack that happened here on Friday is the latest in a series of assaults and hate crimes that have rocked the LGBT community. As the city's nightlife returns, plans are being brought forward to help people feel safe.
Staff will understand how to look after somebody if they are feeling vulnerable, if they've been attacked, or if they just feel uneasy, really. Talking to, obviously, to our partners in other cities, and we are seeing the same thing, and again, it's worrying and we need to be tackling it, but it definitely isn't just a Liverpool thing.
Only last month, hundreds of people showed their solidarity with a march through the city centre against rising hate crime. How would you describe the mood in the LGBT community now after these attacks that there have been?
They're afraid, but they're also angry. And I don't think this will be the last attack.
As life gets back to normal across the country, tensions are also coming out in the open. And beneath the colours lies a darker truth. Some people can't walk the streets free from fear. Hannah Miller, ITV News in Liverpool.
Firefighters are struggling to contain huge wildfires in California, not helped by extreme temperatures. The region's in the middle of one of its worst droughts in recent memory. Here's our US correspondent Emma Murphy on the battle against the inferno.
America's firefighters are used to the perilous wildfires of summer.
The fire's rolling downhill here.
But this year, their work is even more demanding.
This thing's going to touch down on Frenchman Boulevard here in the next hour, I say, or less.
Record-breaking temperatures across much of the west of the country are adding to the seasonal blazes. Already this year, there have been 6,000 more fires than in the whole of last year. Almost 2 million acres ablaze. A fierce drought is adding to the challenges, as fires are battled in temperatures reaching up to 48 degrees Celsius. One of the most damaging is now in and around the Californian town of Doyle. This is the second time in 8 months flames have destroyed homes.
It was just too much. I didn't have no water, nothing. I was pouring beer on it.
Evacuation orders have saved human life, but not all lives could be saved.
3 dogs, or 4 dogs, I'm sorry, I think they're gone. I couldn't get them out, they couldn't see, the smoke was there, so I think they're gone.
More than 11,000 firefighters are now seeking to protect other homes and communities across the country, as America's hot summer threatens a long and challenging fire season. Emma Murphy, ITV News in the United States.
Ryanair have announced plans to hire 2,000 pilots. The budget airline said the roles would be created thanks to the arrival of 210 new aircraft over the next 3 years. Ryanair has managed to avoid redundancies throughout the pandemic, although most staff were forced to accept pay cuts. And finally tonight, as England fans reflect on what could have been, a reminder of what the team did achieve. They brought a nation together at a time when they needed it more than ever. And as Grant Vincent reports, they inspired people from all generations and backgrounds.
Defenders and attackers don't go in the area, yeah?
Yes, there was disappointment at the last. But before that, Mr. Southgate and his band of brothers brought precious joy to a country that has spent much of the last year cooped up. at a walking football club. Players old enough to remember the last time England were in a major final, and what a deep well of inspiration that achievement provides.
I was brought up to watch the 1966 World Cup final, and we won it. And my hero from that day on, when I was a kid, I was Bobby Charlton all my life when I was a kid. Now the kids could be Raheem Sterling, or they can be Harry Kane for another 50 years.
The England team draws its talent from every corner of this country, from East End to West Riding, from inner city to market town, and it found new support in those places too.
My younger daughter, she's 13, and yesterday, well, she doesn't really like watching football, but since England have actually gone through to the semi-finals and they've done so well, she would be the first person ready on the sofa.
And in the primary schools where England's new heroes once played on little pitches, what lessons they have passed on. Work hard, be brave, and know that setbacks are so often followed by success.
Sancho, Marcus Rashford and Saka, you're all ballers, especially Saka. You've got such a big future ahead of you. Jadon, with that transfer recently to Man United, you can go very far, and you will go far. And don't let that penalty miss bring you down. You'll go very far.
England's fine footballers will have more chances to win the greatest prize, but never mind that for now. For a few fantastic weeks in this fretful summer, they gave us much to be thankful for. Geraint Vincent, ITV News.
They certainly did. Right, that's it for now. Tom's here at 10, but from all of us here, bye-bye.